In this video, I want to talk to you about how to find intervals on a staff. Here we have our grand staff. As a pianist, your right hand would be playing in the top staff, and your left hand would be playing in the bottom staff. So let's take our right hand and play some of the notes in the treble clef. So if I'm going to start with the key of C major, what I can do for intervals is write a C on a ledger line below, and then up to the next line, right here, we would count this as a second, because a C to a D or a line to the next space is always going to be a second. And that's true if it's an F to a G. That's true if it is a D to an E. Any line to a space that's adjacent is going to be called a second. Now, if we use our same C down here on a ledger line, then we go from this line to this line, skipping the space. We're going to call that third. And eventually, as we go and modify the second note, up to this F is going to be a fourth. Now remember, we always want to count the bottom note as 1. So this line of a C is 1, and then the D would be 2, even though it doesn't actually exist there. The E on the line would be 3, and ultimately this F would be the interval of a fourth. So the interval, again, is between two notes, and to find it on a staff, we want to count from the bottom all the way to the top. Now, if you have an interval that is separate, like this note, which is an F, up to this note, like this, we call these melodic intervals. Just because when you play a melody, these are the kinds of intervals you get, separate notes. So from this note, this F up to this E, we would count this space as 1. We would count the line here as 2. Space is 3, 4 for this line, 5 for this space, 6 for this line, and this space is a 7. So this would be a melodic interval of a seventh. Now, if we were to use the same notes, but we were to put them at the same time or play them at the same time, say we want to keep this F and keep the same E, we would still have a seventh. However, now we would be playing them at the same time. Therefore, we would actually call this a harmonic interval. So the difference between a harmonic and a melodic interval is that a harmonic interval is played at the same time, and a melodic interval is played at separate times, like a melody. Now, oftentimes, our harmonic intervals will happen in the bass, like this. So oftentimes, you'll see the bass notes in harmonic intervals. And sometimes we'll see the melodic intervals more often in our right hand or our treble clef part, like this. These would be eighth notes, quarter note, quarter note. So from here to here, we would have a third. So we'd count 1, 2, 3 for our third. It would be a melodic third. And then from here to here, we would have a separate interval, and that would be another third. And then from this E all the way down to this A would be our fifth, would be a melodic fifth. Now on the bottom, we have these other intervals from the A to an E would be the interval of a fifth. And this would be called a harmonic fifth because they're played together. So that's the major difference between a harmonic and a melodic interval. And this is how we can find intervals on the staff. The best way to do this is to think in the context of a scale. So let's take, for example, our G major scale, which has 1 sharp. I'm going to write it in the bass clef for us. So we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. Now we can look at all of these notes in the context of this scale to give us all of our intervals. So from the tonic to the second note, or the supertonic, we would have a second. From the bottom note tonic to the third note of the scale, we would get a third. From the bottom note to the fourth note, we would get a fourth, and we would get all of the subsequent intervals. We keep going, fifth, sixth, seventh, and ultimately an octave. Now we can also find different qualities of intervals as well. So you may have heard the term major versus minor versus a perfect interval, right? Well, let's go over the perfect intervals first. So in terms of intervals, we can have perfect intervals. We represent that with a P. And then we can have major intervals, which we typically represent with a capital M. And then we can have minor intervals, which represents with a lowercase m. Now, these are the three main types of intervals we see. Now, when we go from in our major scale, in our G major scale, when we go from G to C, we're going to have our perfect fourth. I'm sorry, G to C is going to be our perfect fourth. Here we go. So we say it's a perfect fourth. When we go from G to our D, we're also going to get another perfect interval. So fourths and fifths are most often perfect. Not always, but for the most part, about maybe 80% of the time, they're going to be called perfect intervals. And of course, from our bottom to our top note, G to G, is what we call a perfect octave. So there's no such thing as a major octave, no such thing as a minor octave. There's no such thing as a major or minor fourths or fifths. It's always going to be a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and a perfect eighth. Now, in the major scale, we can also find our major second by going from G to A. It's going to be our major second, so capital M, and then a 2. We also have a major third going from G to our B. Now our G to our C is already taken, G to D is already taken, so then we have G to an E, which is going to be a major sixth. And finally, going from G to F sharp is going to be our major seventh. So in the major scale, most of the intervals are going to be major, but some of the intervals are going to be perfect. Now this is all when we count from the tonic. If you were to count from the supertonic or the dominant, now that would create different types of intervals. But if you want to find any of the major intervals, like a major second, major third, major sixth, and major seventh, we can use the tonic, or G in this case. Counting up to the seventh, that will always give us a major seventh. Or counting up to the sixth will always give us a major sixth. Counting up to the third will always give us a major third. Counting up to the second will always give us a major second. Now, if we want to look at, let's say, we want to look at the minor version, keeping the same key signature, we would start with E minor. So you have E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, and then of course our octave here. Now again, this E to E octave is going to give us our perfect octave, even in a minor scale. Still going to be perfect. And even in a minor scale, our 1 to our 4 is going to be perfect. So here is going to be perfect fourth. Then from our E to our B is going to be perfect fifth. Then if we look at the E to our F sharp, we're going to get our minor second. If we look at E to our G, we're going to get a minor third. And then if we look from E to this C, we're going to get our minor sixth. And then of course, E to this D is going to give us our minor seventh. So most of the intervals, in fact 4 of the intervals that we find in our minor scale, is going to be minor. So most of them are going to be minor, and of course we still have our 3 perfect intervals, because again, our perfect intervals don't change based on the scale. So if you want to look for finding or try to find a major second or a minor second, use the scale. to help you. If you want to find minor intervals, try to use a minor scale and look from the tonic up to that interval, and you'll always find the minor interval. If you want to use a major scale, you'll find all of the major intervals. So these are going to be the most common intervals: the perfect, the minor, and the major. And on the screen, you'll see all of the different types and possibilities of intervals. Well, I hope this was a good overview. We'll have some other videos that look more in depth at the intervals, but this is a good overview for how you can find and create all of the intervals using a scale. Thanks for watching.